Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. You can always watch us on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and of course on our own website, muslimnetwork.tv, as well as YouTube and social media. And it's just interesting. There was a time when I was young, myself and many others will regularly march against nuclear weapons. We don't see that any often. A nuclear device no larger than the traditional bomb can devastate an entire city by blast, fire, and radiation. I have stood in Hiroshima seeing, watching, and visualizing the destructive power of atomic bomb. And now hydrogen bomb generates explosive force 100 to 1,000 times the destructive power of Hiroshima bomb. Nuclear weapons seems to be like an old issue from a previous generation and a previous time. We don't hear young people talking about it. Whereas the doomsday clock run by the atomic scientists say we're just 100 seconds away from the doomsday. Why nuclear scientists are worried about it and the world doesn't seem to care. Earlier last year, first time in human history, a nuclear power India bombed another nuclear power Pakistan. And they bombed with the traditional power. Pakistan shot down the Indian plane, but that challenged the deterrence theory that if everybody has a nuclear bomb, people will not use it. There will be peace between them. Then later on, I saw at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, one of the major think tanks in America, one Indian scholar presenting a theory that the nuclear power can still engage in traditional warfare. So a theory is being promoted for ongoing traditional warfare between two nuclear powers. Well, what is the time when one of them will say enough is enough and use the nuclear bomb? Insane, isn't it? Well, there are some sane people, I must say. They're doing insane things to point out the dangerous insanity of the nuclear power. In April of last year, 2018, 7 peace activists broke into Naval Submarine Base in Kings Bay, Georgia, home of several nuclear-armed submarines. Once inside, they carried out non-violent actions to protest the US nuclear weapon system. They spilled their own blood on the property, beat weapons with hammers, and put crime scene tape around the base. All 7 were arrested and convicted. One of those Catholic peace activists was Martha Hennesy. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you so much.
Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Hennessy.
Hennessy. Okay. Tennessee Hennessy. Okay, that will be helpful. Martha Hennessy. My mistake. I normally check beforehand. Martha Hennessy is 7th grandchild of Dorothy Day. She divides her time between family farm in Vermont and practicing the works of mercy at Mary House Catholic Workers in New York City. She's 64, a retired occupational therapist, and a grandmother of 8. She has been imprisoned protesting war and nuclear weapons, the use of drones, and the torture of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. She has traveled to several countries, including Russia, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Korea, and Palestine, to understand the impact of US military policy and war in other countries. She travels and speaks on the topics of life and work in community Catholic teachings, nuclear abolition, and peacemaking efforts in the tradition of Catholic workers' movement. Thank you for being on our show.
Thank you for having me.
I came to know Catholic workers' movement through Kathy Kelly, who I consider to be my mentor in the peace movement and an icon in Chicago's peace movement in the community. So you were one of the sevens who entered the naval submarine base. How were you able to enter a base? Don't they have some protective systems there?
Yes, it's a very huge base, 17,000 acres. And we clipped a padlock at a remote gate and walked for an hour or two. And the last plowshares action in 2012, it did trigger a congressional hearing because 3 people did enter the plutonium facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And the question always comes up, well, how secure are these weapons? If someone really put their mind to getting to them, it does happen.
So you were able to walk inside the base for 1 hour before you being detected.
Yes. And in fact, we broke into 3 different groups, and the base, the moment it understood that we were there, had to secure the nuclear warhead bunker first and foremost. So the others of us were neglected and ignored and driven past for about an hour while they were dealing with the other site.
So that does raise a question how safe these things are. You are the peacemaker. You didn't mean any harm to anyone. But if some nation or some of those nuts in our country who have this militia or that militia want to sabotage or control anything or destroy China because we hate China or destroy any other country, I mean, this is a one of probably major reason why these things need to be under control or safe. So you were able to reach and put hammer to those bombs?
No one would ever strike on one of the warheads. They're in bunkers. This is a symbolic, sacramental disarmament action. And in some of the actions, they were able to, put hammer symbolically to nose cones at the manufacturing plants. But we raised the issue of the nuclear weapons by, posting an indictment that referenced the treaties and the Nuremberg Principles and the Geneva Convention, saying that these weapons are illegal. And we also left a book by Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers called The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. It's all about educating the people on the base about what their jobs really do entail. And this particular base can strike anywhere on the planet within 15 minutes. And we also hung a banner that said, Trident, the ultimate logic of Trident is omnicide. And we took that from Martin Luther King's slogan of the ultimate logic of racism is genocide.
I saw that. That was the banner which you had on display before you entered, right?
Yes, we had 3 banners. The third one was nuclear weapons, illegal, immoral.
Okay. So were you able to, when you're doing that, you were detained, were you able to talk to some people who were detaining you?
I'm sorry, able to talk to people at the base?
Yes.
Yes, well, the arresting officers who came to us, we read our action statement to them. We were interrogated for several hours afterwards, and we do our best to speak truth to power and give them facts and information as best we can under those conditions. And then the other two parts of the action take place in the U.S. federal courtrooms. And then the third component is ministry in the prisons. And with all three of those steps, we do our best to talk about nuclear weapons and get the topic out into the public.
So this is this whole thing is educational process which you engage in.
Educational and spiritual, and it's a very, very serious proposition.
So where the case stands right now, I mean, has the judge decided what will happen to you?
We were put on trial last October, and we were found guilty of 4 counts: conspiracy, depredation of government property, destruction of naval property, and trespass. And now we await sentencing. We did have a sentencing date of June 29th, but now that has been extended to July 31st because of the pandemic. We do want to appear before the judge in person. That is our constitutional right. We do not want to appear remote video. And with the pandemic, it's dangerous to travel. So we have dragged our feet and received another delay. And so July 31st and 30th, the rest of the folks will be sentenced. Liz McAllister was already sentenced to time served.
So if your purpose is educational, spiritual is between yourself and God Almighty. The educational is with other people. So this is not probably the first action against the nuclear weapons, and probably it will not be the last one. But what lessons were learned from this educational exercise, which you plan to apply for future?
That's a good question. I mean, I still have to give my sentencing statement. And with that, I am supposed to express remorse and a willingness to never behave this way again. Some people have done Plowshares actions 2 to 4 to 6 times. Father Steve Kelly, I'm not sure what number action this is for him. But what I would say is so critical to learn is that the weapons are made so invisible and so unspeakable and so difficult. With our trial in the federal court, we were not allowed any kind of a defense. And in fact, at one point, one of the jurors asked the question, "Are there nuclear weapons on that base?" And no one was allowed to answer that question to the juror. And it's amazing to watch how the federal courts have successfully, for 30 years, disallowed expert testimony on the legality of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. So, the lessons learned for me are that we all must keep trying the best we can, as long as we can, as long as we have these weapons. I think what is different today is that Pope Francis is speaking out very clearly for nuclear abolition. And, the doomsday clock, as you mentioned, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists now have it at 100 seconds to midnight under the current U.S. administration. And the dangers just continue to increase. And the longer we practice this brinksmanship, the more of a chance there is that there'll be something terrible that will happen. But in fact, the Pentagon does have a first strike limited nuclear strike plan, which is completely illegal.
When you say limited, what does that mean?
There's something called the WD-2 nuclear warhead that has been sent out that is 5 kilotons. It was sent out from Kings Bay around Christmas time, a gift from the Christians. And it was sent, I think, towards the Middle East. And, this bomb is small. I think that the Pentagon, there are some people in the U.S. military and the administration who believe that a first limited strike is winnable. And it's incredibly, extremely dangerous.
So the theory is that before anybody does anything with the nuclear warhead, you use yours to destroy theirs, and that's the victory. Is that the concept?
I guess you take out their ability to strike back.
Hmm.
Deterrence is a false premise. They've been debating this for decades now, and I don't know the complete ins and outs of it, or I can barely grasp the rationale that these people are trying to use. But the United States is becoming very arrogant.
You're watching Muslim Network TV, and this is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Martha Hennesy, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Martha Hennesy. Share with us, is America fully aware of what a nuclear bomb does?
No. How could they be? We have never suffered under bombs. We have never had whole cities destroyed. Our greatest destruction was with the Civil War, and that was pre-modern warfare. And with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the public was very much protected from seeing images of what had occurred there. So no, we don't have enough of an understanding of what it means.
So what is the, that's okay, she can participate. I mean, your cat is saying she agrees with you that America doesn't know about what is going on at this moment about the nuclear warfare. So in educational process, don't you think the exhibits and artifact from Hiroshima should travel in America to educate people?
That is a wonderful thought. Yes. We have done such a thorough job of brainwashing the people and having them forget about this incident, this history. We're the only country who has dropped the bomb. And, my grandmother used to say, the great scandal is that these weapons are in the hands of white Christians. And I think the more education we can do, we've just done, I'm so ignorant of my own country's history in many, many ways. So the more that we can educate, the better. But there has to be a political will there. The industry dictates to us what we learn and how we learn it. The capitalist system dictates so much of what happens in our lives that I think the question is how to overcome the censorship with our media.
So the what is the state of nuclear anti-nuke movement? And your group is one. How many other groups are there?
I'm no expert at that. We have Nuclear Resistor in Wisconsin and Nuclear Resistor in Tucson, Arizona, and Nuke Watch in Luck, Wisconsin. And these are newsletters that have been published for over 30 years, where they try to keep track of the nuclear weapons systems, the geopolitical situation, and the prisoners who are actually serving time resisting the nuclear arsenal here in the US. But as far as a public movement, and I think that the peace movement in the United States has been in disarray since the United States destroyed Iraq. And I think it's very hard for people to regroup when there are so many distractions and people have more of a hardship in taking care of themselves and paying their bills and raising and educating their children. The United States has changed drastically in the past 30 years, economically and socially. So, I mean, the problems are multifaceted and run very, very deep.
So is there any any entity or any group which sort of does a coordinating meeting of all the anti-nuclear weapon groups so they can communicate with each other and share ideas how to amplify each other's voice?
Yes, well, we have ICAN, International Committee on the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons. And in July of 2017, at the UN in New York City, this treaty was put together, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, and I think it now has 81 signatories and 36 states who are agreeing that this needs to go into effect. And thank God that that work has been done and that the international effort really has made a difference. And I think we are coming to a place in history where the world is very receptive to abolishing nuclear weapons. I think the intransigence of the United States and perhaps Russia to a lesser degree is what we're really dealing with here.
Well, so if the United States is the main party which need to be mobilized, so if the world agrees and the United States and Russia and some of the countries are blocking, your job of mobilizing America and educating America becomes more critical.
Yeah.
America is no longer committed to the earlier commitment to reduce or limit the nuclear weapons. Am I correct?
Yes, you are correct. And as a Catholic myself, I feel that the U.S. Catholic Church plays an extremely critical role in raising a voice. And Pope Francis has raised that voice, and the U.S. Catholic bishops are not responding the way they need to be responding. And yes, the United States is the sole superpower in the world today, and it definitely rests with us to look at unilateral disarmament and nuclear abolition globally. So we have 9 nuclear states at this point in time. And work needs to be done. Reagan and Gorbachev had a discussion that could have led to nuclear abolition in 1989, and it's the corporate interests that prevented it. It's the weapons industry that dictates. It's not simply Congress and the Pentagon going along with it, along with fooling the public. And the legislators also play a role in continually approving of these budgets without, number one, understanding the incredible destructiveness of these bombs, and number two, not looking into the cost of these bombs. And number three, ignoring what the public actually does want. So the more education that is done, the better.
So, if America is critical for the nuclear disarmament and America doesn't know much about it, what is the focus on younger generation? Because they have done amazing job when it comes to uh, climate change campaigns. They have done amazing job, at least marching, if not achieving results in the gun control in our country.
Yeah.
And now the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, these are younger people. These are not old politicians of Black community. These are younger people.
Yeah.
What can be done to get younger people and this generation become aware of the dangers of nuclear bomb and the responsibility our country has towards it?
Very good question, and I don't know that I have the answer. I am happy to see that there is resistance, open resistance now in the streets. And apparently, we seem to be more psychically capable of looking at and addressing climate disruption. I think the thing that we really steer away from is looking at the US military as the largest carbon footprint in this world and the difficulties that that produces. People are looking at being shot in the streets by the police. People are looking at unemployment. We now have 42 million unemployed. These are circumstances that Dorothy faced at the height of the Depression in 1933 with the birth of the Catholic worker movement, born out of crisis. I can only hope and pray that all of these issues will be connected. I mean, we purposefully chose the 50th anniversary of the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. to do our action because we wanted to highlight the triplets, his triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism. And certainly white supremacy and capitalism is what's holding all of this together. And it's the threat of the nuclear bomb that is the bully stick around the globe. And until we can connect all of the issues, we will be sort of stuck at a lower level, trying to deal with one issue at a time. But they are, in my mind, all interconnected. So I have great hope that these will all come together. I do believe that the Poor People's Campaign with Reverend Barbara is a very critical movement right now.
Well, Reverend Barber's Poor People's Campaign, we interviewed them, and on our Muslim Network TV, we'll give a live coverage of the whole on June 20th, God willing. Now, we will talk a little more about it, but tell me, let's talk, in terms of education. There was some book out there in the past that if a nuclear bomb hits Manhattan, now Manhattan is where you have a center for homeless people. What type of devastation we're looking at if something like that happens to Manhattan?
Millions of people will die instantaneously. The Catholic worker did start a protest against the air raid drills in 1955 at the height of the Cold War. Everyone was told to go duck and cover and, take shelter down in the subways. And Dorothy understood that to be insane psychological warfare, and she refused to participate. And yes, Manhattan, it's the Empire State in the center of the U.S. empire. It would be absolutely horrific. But no more horrific than bombing Moscow or Tokyo or Tehran or any other city on the earth. I'm not a good scientific mind at remembering numbers or statistics, but all I know is that a nuclear explosion anywhere is going to be God's nightmare.
Yeah. It is said that for millionth of a second, Manhattan, the center of the bomb will be as hot at the center of the sun.
Yeah.
and whole thing will be evaporated. Even people who are in those subways and shelters, they will suffocate because there will be no fresh air for them. I mean, I have stood in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, seeing their museum and whatever is left of those buildings. I mean, that thing was very tiny. Now there are thousands of times more power in
Yeah.
these bombs, and nobody seems to realize that. So, education is a whole lot of responsibility, and we will talk about it a little more with Martha Hennessy when we come back. You're watching Muslim Network TV. We're always on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Raku, as well as Muslim Network.tv. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Martha Hennesy, who is the first line in her bio says that she is the granddaughter of Dorothy Day. Who was Dorothy Day?
Dorothy was born in 1897, and in her youth, she was in the thick of it with the bohemian community of New York City. Her father and her brothers were journalists, and she chose that vocation as well. She is an adult Catholic convert. She did a lot of reporting in the 19 teens and 20s and 30s around labor issues. There was a great socialist movement happening in the United States. Our country could have taken a very different direction than it has. And she converted with the birth of my mother, Tamar. 1927, she was baptized. And she started what's called the Catholic Worker Movement in 1933. The country was in great disarray, internal displacement of many, many people. The labor unions were simply struggling to have families be able to take care of their children and have a livable wage. And she just spent the next nearly 50 years taking care of the homeless and the poor in New York City, the Bowery, a very impoverished section of the city, which has now been gentrified. And she dedicated herself to Catholic social teachings. She considered Peter Maurin, a French Catholic peasant, to be the founder of the movement, and he is the one who educated her on Catholic social teachings. And they started a newspaper, and their stamina and their faith and their endurance was quite impressive.
So, what are the Catholic social teachings?
Everyone is born in the image of God. We are all to be revered. Every human life is to be revered. There's a preferential option for the poor, where we are to provide for the least among us, the most vulnerable. There are several encyclicals that have been written by different popes in terms of how to guide us in right livelihood, the dignity of work, and to not engage in wars that are unjust. It's a huge body of knowledge and study, and I have to confess, I haven't done enough homework in that area. But the Catholic social teachings guide us. Dorothy talked about Matthew 25, the Sermon on the Mount, of being our manifesto.
Hmm.
When did you not feed me? When did you not give me food? When did you not clothe me? Christ asks. Uh, and the disciples ask, and Christ simply says, when you did not take care of the least among us. So that is what the Catholic worker has attempted to do all these decades.
So the Catholic workers movement was born when 1923?
33 at the
1933. All right. And you were born into the movement, it seems.
Yes, I was born in 1955, the first year that they resisted the air raid drills.
Okay. So, and now, how big is the Catholic workers movement?
There are it's a loosely held definition of what makes a Catholic worker, but there are probably 200 communities around the country and around the world. And the basic premise is one of voluntary poverty. You live poor, you live simply, so that others may have enough, and that you do the hospitality, the care of the poor, and that you resist injustice. And for me, somehow, it's a perfect model of true Christian practice.
So, if it is the true Christian practice, the Catholic bishops and everybody must be on board, right?
Nope.
So you came up with your own theology, which the Catholic hierarchy doesn't quite buy in?
No, Dorothy was considered a devout daughter of the church, and she followed the Catholic doctrine accurately and consistently. Um, and the bishops gave her a very difficult time in her lifetime. She spoke out against the Spanish Civil War. She spoke out against World War II. She spoke out against the Cold War, the Vietnam War, the Korean War. She witnessed all of these wars in her lifetime. And she felt that the teachings of Christ, telling Peter to put up his sword, and those who live by the sword will die by the sword. You are to die for your friends rather than kill the enemy. And, that kind of practice isn't necessarily what you see in the church hierarchy. Over the centuries, things have changed drastically since the first 300 years of the Christian community, where people were being hunted down and martyred. The Catholic Church is now a very powerful entity, and the Catholics coming to the United States wanted to fit in to this empire and this model, and they didn't want to be persecuted, and they didn't want to be marginalized. And so Dorothy was a very important voice in her lifetime, calling the church to task about what the work truly is, the works of mercy.
So, so Catholic workers movement was not accepted by mainstream Catholics. How many Catholics are there in America? I think 30% of America probably is Catholic, isn't it?
Yes, it's a significant amount. 25% of the U.S. military is Catholic. The large percentage of the Supreme Court is Catholic, and look how they operate. So yes, the population, the representation is fairly significant, and if Catholics were to raise the voice that Pope Francis is trying to encourage us to raise, it could have a significant impact on how we do things and how we are in a permanent war economy. These are the things that really must change.
So, so you are following the steps of your grandma Dorothy Day. Who among your children or grandchildren are following that path?
I'm the only practicing Catholic in the family for several generations.
Okay.
No, that's a tough question. I mean, I can't even explain myself in terms of how I returned to the church and how I returned to the Catholic worker. But it certainly makes me very nervous when people describe me as following in her footsteps. That's a tough order.
So she's also noted in saying that Catholic economic theory of distribution
Mm.
is a third way between capitalism and socialism. I mean, capitalism and socialism being at her time probably were the more prominent two ways, and now the socialism of China is
Mhm.
essentially authoritarian capitalism. And that is the mother of destructive capitalism now. But in two ways, and she thinks that Catholic theory of distribution is a third way. Do you know anything about what is that theory?
No, I'm quite ignorant and not very well educated in those theories.
But probably based on what you just said about taking care of poor and the needy and equal distribution and instead of concentration of wealth in some hands, right?
Yeah, it's a very basic, simple human concept. You
Yeah.
know, what we try to teach children at a very young age.
Hmm.
Don't hit and share.
Yeah, share more and consume less. I mean, this is something which I have been doing in my family
Yeah.
as well as in my teachings. I mean, in Islam also, likewise, there has been, when there was a big debate between communism and capitalism in Pakistan, where I was raised,
Mhm.
initial days, there was always a call of the third way,
Ah,
which is a considerate way. And now it is evolved into something called Islamic economics and Islamic banking. There
mhm.
are thousands of banks and who follow these models, and it is said to be a $4 or $5 trillion economy.
Oh,
But when I was growing up in the 60s, people used to just talk about it. There should be a third way between capitalism and socialism.
yeah.
And the teachings, would they articulate all these theses and banks are more or less the same, which you described. So I wonder if the basic teachings of faith, because all faith, I believe, are revealed faith from God Almighty. As a Muslim, we are supposed to, not supposed to, we are asked to believe in the teachings of Jesus and Moses and all sent by God Almighty. In all these scriptures, there is common element of human beings being cared for. I mean, there is a strong emphasis in our ethics about distribution of wealth,
Yeah.
and there are instituted measures of reducing the concentration of wealth.
Mhm.
So teachings, so when I saw the Dorothy Day has this theory, that Catholic economic theory of distributionism, I thought,
Yeah.
wow, this is something which I'm familiar with from my childhood. So what is I mean, Catholic workers movement? You mentioned there are 200 or so houses. Have
Mhm.
you visited many of those houses?
Yes, I've been to the LA Catholic Worker, the Houston Catholic Worker, the Baltimore Catholic Worker, Hartford, Connecticut, New Haven, Connecticut, Milwaukee. I've tried to, you know, make the rounds to get to know folks, and it's a wonderful, incredible thing. I mean, each house has to develop its own ministry in its own neighborhood based on those immediate local needs. And I think the idea of distributism, we have a clothing room where people bring their donations, and people are just constantly consuming, buying, and getting rid of clothing and other articles. And Mary House functions beautifully as a way to redistribute the excess. New York City produces an incredible amount of garbage per year. And, much of what gets thrown away is perfectly usable. And so the houses just do what they can where they can. And right now, between the pandemic and the protests, hunger is setting in.
Mm.
The apocalyptic biblical events of uh, famine and plague and war. I mean, it's all happening around us. And For me, the answer is distributism.
Hmm. So, so consuming less and sharing more and being thoughtful about what we are discarding, could it be usable by other human beings? I mean, these are great thoughts. So do these 200 houses, do they connect with each other, one of this place, or they are all independent?
Uh, we consider ourselves anarchists. So, people do things their own ways, trying to
A
follow.
non-violent anarchist, I must say.
Yes. The voluntary poverty, the pacifism are very critical components. And so all of the houses, we do have a national gathering every 5 years. But there's no big boss and there's no, set structure other than the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. And many of the houses don't practice Catholicism. I think that the movement is now 87 years old, and I think the longevity of it could be contributed to our tolerance and our diversity. But then there are others who may argue that the movement is not what it used to be or what it should be in these times. So it's all very challenging.
So you mentioned your organization as an anarchist. Is being an anarchist is something appreciable by the society?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
You mentioned you're sort of an anarchist.
Yeah.
What is anarchist?
Well, we don't need police to tell us to be good. We need to do what's right. We need to practice our faith based generosity, loving kindness, and it's nonviolent anarchism. It's not violence, and it's self-regulation, and to trust that people actually do know how to behave and take care of themselves. I think that the capitalist system just unleashes greed. The capitalist system dictates shortages and tells everyone to get what they can for themselves. And that's the opposite of distributism and Sabbath, what they call Sabbath economics, where God gave us enough. We need to learn how to bridle our greed.
Greed is something.
Yeah.
The greed is the one, consuming more and more we consume, more demand creates for production, and people want to produce more and more for us to buy cheap and cheap.
Yeah.
And more they want to produce, the more fossil fuels are consumed. And that's where the destruction of the planet, along with we're destroying ourselves spiritually by consuming so much.
Yeah. So we live in a finite ecology and ecosystem, and yet we're told to infinitely consume.
So your grandmother Dorothy Day was arrested 11 times. How many times have you been arrested?
Uh, I don't know. As Phil Berrigan would say, not enough.
Not enough.
I've been arrested around issues of nuclear power, nuclear weapons, the use of drones to kill from long distance, and the use of torture in Guantanamo. And I don't know. I don't know how many times I've been arrested.
So
Not that many.
so this Guantanamo Bay. I mean, just like nuclear weapon, nobody seems to talk about what happening in Guantanamo Bay. Is it still there?
Yes. There are, I think, 40 prisoners still there, going on to nearly 20 years now. No
Huh.
charges, no being brought to trial, no following of the rule of law, and many of them have been on hunger strike. There's been some incredible poetry written while they were there, suffering the horrific suffering that they've been undergoing, and this is left over with the 9/11 events and the endless war on terror. And I do believe that the United States keeps a foothold there. The Cubans don't want it to be there anymore, but the foothold is there as a means to be able to control the population, to send political dissidents into prisons, like what the Soviet Union did. I think that we're perfectly capable of behaving that way. And there are detention centers all around the country right now. That's how we are treating the refugees from South and Central America. They are coming here as a result of the wars we waged down there and the economic war that's going on. It's just an endless litany of not taking responsibility and causing immense human suffering, and it's got to end.
Well, thank you so much. Martha Hennessy is a seventh grandchild of Dorothy Day and a leader of Catholic Workers Movement. Thank you so much for being on Muslim Network TV. I truly appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm not a leader, I'm a volunteer.
Well, yes, you're an anarchist. No one is a leader, right?
We need examples in each other.
You can always watch us on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and on our website, muslimnetwork.tv. We're also on social media on YouTube. And thank you for our intern producer, Sumaya Heather, and thank you, Zahra Nadeem, for producing our show today. Peace and salam.
Salam alaikum. Peace to you.
Salam.